Hello, welcome to lesson number 2 in the unit on the Srivijaya kingdom. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about trade and commerce in Srivijaya. Alright, as I mentioned before, Palembang was the political capital of the Srivijaya kingdom. It was also the most important city in regards to trade. It was what's known as an entrepot, which is a place where people from different regions of the world will come together to trade their goods. Okay, and in fact, there were giant warehouses built by the government of Srivijaya that were meant to house or for storing the goods that came into the city. Okay, so there would be goods stored in this warehouse from India, from China, from Persia, from Arabia, and maybe even further, maybe from European countries as well. All right. So this indicates that actually the government of Srivijaya was quite strong and unified and very well organized, because they could really control the trade that was taking place in their kingdom. Now Srivijaya got rich, actually, much like Funan, through trade. The government would charge a toll on the ships that came through for trading. So if a ship was coming from China with Chinese merchants and Chinese products, they would have to pay a certain amount of money for the privilege of trading in Palembang. Okay. Another way that the kingdom got rich was by trading their own natural resources. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the natural resources that were harvested in Srivijaya. Like the other kingdoms and civilizations that we've studied so far, of course, rice was the main crop in Srivijaya. Most of the rice was actually produced on the island of Java and then imported into Sumatra to feed the local population and also the merchants that were coming through. Some rice was also grown on the island of Sumatra near the Musi River, but most of the rice in the kingdom was grown in Java and distributed throughout the kingdom. A lot of natural resources were harvested by people living in the mountains in central Sumatra. Right, Palembang was nearer to the coast, located on a river, the Musi River. All right. However, the mountains of Sumatra were centralized. They were located in the center of the island, and people living there would have harvested resources like camphor, which was the primary resource for the Srivijaya people. And camphor is used for yadom in a modern context. Okay, so for clearing the sinuses. They also harvested some spices and aromatic woods like resins and sandalwood, which would have been used for incense. So they were used for their pleasant odor. Okay, so those are the things that were grown in the Srivijaya kingdom, throughout the Srivijaya kingdom, and sold to merchants from other countries. Now, what did other merchants bring to Srivijaya to sell? Well, silk and ceramics were sold by Chinese merchants. Okay. Perfume and glass perfume bottles were sold by Persians. Frankincense from the Middle East, so that's another scented product. And sandalwood from Timor. Alright, so a lot of the same products that were sold in Funan were also sold in Srivijaya. Here you have an example of the glass perfume bottles that came from Persia. And here's some ceramics from China. Right. Now, one important thing to consider when studying the kingdom of Srivijaya is trade winds. especially when we're talking about trading. Right? Because the merchants really had to rely on these trade winds to actually make it to Palembang for trading. So they really had to understand the way the winds worked. Of course, back then they used sailboats. Right? So the wind was very important for traveling. So they needed a deep understanding of which direction the winds were moving in, okay, and the seasonal patterns of the winds. So trade winds are seasonal winds, which move from southwest in the region of Southeast Asia, which move from southwest from May to August, and northeast from November to April. Now the reason that the winds move in these directions during those parts of the year has to do with the part of the Earth that is found directly under the sun. So it has a lot to do with high and low pressure systems throughout the year, which we learned about in geography earlier last semester. But we're not going to go into any details about high and low pressure systems right now. But you do need to know about trade winds and which direction they moved at which parts of the year. Okay, so once again to recap, trade winds are seasonal winds which move from southeast from May to August and from northeast from November to April. Now you can imagine that merchants really needed to understand these trade winds because they had to plan their travels based on these winds, as it says right here. And often they would have to wait at a certain location for the winds to change so that they can either move onward, let's say from Palembang to India if they're coming from China, or to go back to their original location. All right, so if there's a ship coming from China and it lands in Palembang, it would have to wait for the winds to change in the opposite direction to actually make it home. All right. Now that caused something to happen, which is very important for understanding the Srivijaya society, or at least the society in the entrepot of Palembang. All right. So you had all these merchants coming from India, from China, from Persia, from Arabia, from other regions, and they all had to sort of wait for several weeks or several months in Palembang for the winds to change so they can get back home, or so that they can travel onward. And you can imagine that Palembang had a lot of people living there that were whose cultures were very diverse. People from different parts of the world, people who had different cultures. Okay. This led to something called multiculturalism, which most large cities have today. Most large cities are multicultural. Okay, around the world, of course. So multiculturalism means that people from many cultures are living together and interacting in one location. So as I said, traders from different parts of the world would have had to have stayed for long periods of time in Palembang, right? And they would have interacted, and they likely would have shared their cultures, right? So it led to a lot of cultural interaction, as it says here on the slide, between Indians, Chinese, Arabs, locals, local Malays, and anybody else who may have been trading in Palembang at the time. All right. Just a little interesting bit of information here. There was a Persian writer, a Persian traveler, who wrote that while he was staying in Palembang, he heard the parrots speaking many different languages, including Arabic, Persian, and Greek. So you can imagine that if even the parrots were speaking different languages, a lot of different languages would have been spoken in Palembang because people would have come from so many different places around the world. You can imagine the people would have lived together and shared their cultures. Alright, if you were walking through the streets of Palembang, you probably would have heard several different languages being spoken, people dressed different ways, people eating different foods. Okay, much like many big metropolitan cities of today. Okay. Not sure why this particular parrot is speaking English. English probably was not one of the languages spoken in Palembang at the time, but you would have had Arabic, Persian, Greek, Malay, maybe Khmer, Indian, of course. Okay, many different languages. Of course, the language of Persia is actually called Farsi, regardless. Anyway, that's it for this lesson, so thank you very much for listening.